You know that feeling when you look at a perfectly crafted miniature scene and it feels so real you could just shrink down and walk right in? Well, that's not magic. And it's not just about making things small, it's about speaking a kind of secret language.
So that's the big question, right? How do you create something that doesn't just look like a dollhouse, but feels like a real living world that's been shrunk down? The answer, and this is the cool part, has less to do with complicated math and way more to do with tricking our own brains. So let's learn the first word in this new language. And that first word is scale. Scale is the single most important rule that's going to govern our entire miniature world. Think of it like the grammar, the code that makes sure every tiny object relates to every other tiny object in a way that just makes sense. Now for this project, we're going to be working in what's called 1 to 30 scale. All that means is that for every 1 unit of measurement on our model, the real thing would be 30 times bigger. So 1 millimeter on our tiny model represents 30 millimeters, or 3 centimeters in real life. Simple as that. Okay, and here is the magic trick. Forget the complicated formulas. You don't need a calculator. For this scale, there's this fantastic little bit of head math you can do. Just take the real-world size in centimeters, divide it by 3, and that's your model size in millimeters. That's it. That's the whole key. So we've got our rule. Where do we even begin building our 1950s world? With a car? The house? Nope. We start with the one thing our brain understands instinctively, better than any ruler on Earth: a person. The human figure is our anchor. It's the yardstick we're going to measure everything else against. So let's meet our guy. This is our typical 1950s adult male. And here's a cool little historical fact. Average heights were actually a bit shorter back then. So we're going to say he's about 173 centimeters tall. He is going to be the absolute key to making this entire scene feel right. And now we just use our trick. 173 centimeters, divide that by 3, and we get a model figure that's 58 millimeters tall. And there he is. This tiny 58 millimeter person is now our absolute reference point. Every single thing we add from here on out gets checked against him. All right, now that we have our ruler, it's time to build a world around him. We're going to use this little guy not just to measure things, but to constantly ask ourselves the most important question of all. Does this feel right? First up, a doorway. A standard interior door back in the 50s was about 200 centimeters tall. Run that through our formula, and it scales down to 67 millimeters. Now, look at them side by side. Our 58 millimeter person has believable headroom. He's not about to hit his head, but the door doesn't look like a giant cave entrance either. It just looks right. Next, let's look at a kitchen counter. A standard counter is about 90 centimeters high, which scales down to 30 millimeters. And look where that 30 millimeter counter hits our 58 millimeter guy. It's right at his hip level. That is an instant, subconscious signal to your brain that says, yep, this makes sense, this is real. So this is the whole point. Our brains are hardwired to understand these specific relationships. A person has to fit through a door. A counter needs to be out about hip height to work on. A chair and a table need to feel like you could actually sit there comfortably. If you get these 3 things right, you've already built the foundation of a believable world. Okay, the architecture feels right. Now for the fun part. Furnishing the space. These little objects aren't just fillers, you know? They are tiny time capsules. Each piece tells a story, not just about the room, but about the entire era. Oh, take the television. This is fantastic. In the 1950s, a TV was a massive piece of wooden furniture, a real statement piece. But inside that enormous cabinet was a teeny tiny screen, maybe 12 to 21 inches. It's the literal opposite of today, where we have huge screens and thin frames. That one detail just screams 1950s. And the refrigerator tells a pretty similar story. It was tall, sure, but it was way smaller than the giant fridges we have today. A typical 1950s fridge scales down to about 55 millimeters, so just a little shorter than our guy. It's another one of those perfect little visual clues about the time period. And of course, if our scene goes outside, we have to talk about the car. Those incredible 1950s sedans were so long and wide and low to the ground. At our scale, the roofline of one would be about 50 millimeters high, so our 58 millimeter person could comfortably look right over the top of it. Again, it's another one of those checks that just feels right. So, after all this building and all this measuring, what have we really learned? What's the secret? What is the one core idea that ties this all together and makes these tiny worlds feel so incredibly real?
Well, here it is. This is the big takeaway. The secret isn't about being perfectly precise down to a fraction of a millimeter. It's about getting the relationships between things right. Your brain cares way more that a person looks correct standing next to a door than it cares if that door is 67 or 68 millimeters tall.
So it really just boils down to this super simple three-step process. 1, always start with the real-world size of an object. 2, lock in those most important relationships first. Your people, your doors, your counters. And 3, don't be afraid to round things off to make them easier to work with. Remember, a 1 millimeter mistake is only 3 centimeters in the real world. Nobody's gonna notice.
So, to wrap it all up, we've learned that scale is basically a language that you can master with a simple division trick. We've figured out that the human figure is your absolute best ruler for making things believable. We know that focusing on those key visual relationships is way more important than perfect precision. And we've seen how all these tiny objects are really like little artifacts telling us a story about a completely different time.
And that leaves us with one final thought. You know, this whole process, it forces you to pay incredibly close attention to the world around you, to the height of a countertop, the size of a TV, just the way we fit into our own environment. So the question is, by making our world tiny, what big ideas about our own lives, both past and present, do we suddenly see with perfect clarity?